So, hello everybody. Tonight I'm here with Scott, and I've been trying to ask him how to say his last name. So, Forsgren, I
You
believe is
got
how
it.
he says it. All right.
Correct.
He is amazing. I've been listening to his podcast for years. So many talented people that he's gotten on there, so much good information. He's amazing at being able to break it down for you and make it make sense so that you can put it to use for yourself or at least get on the right track. So, Scott, thank you for joining me tonight.
Thank you for having me here. I'm so excited to be here.
Now, I know that you had a journey of your own through health here. Lyme and mold were a big piece of it. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so my journey started 24 years ago here in Northern California. I had a weekend where I just had like a major flu, but it was much more than any flu I had experienced before. And over the next several months, my symptoms were so bad and so unfamiliar that at times I wasn't sure if I would even survive it. And there were certainly times back then that that would have been okay. Some of the symptoms that I experienced, probably one of the worst was head to toe burning sensations that lasted for several years. It was actually a neurological symptom that felt like a constant sunburn. I had issues just getting up and walking across the room, issues with balance. So sitting up in a chair was difficult, lying in bed without pillows propped up on one side so that I didn't feel like I was going to roll onto the floor. Lots of different symptoms, visual disturbances, light sensitivity, sound sensitivity, joint pain, lots of gastrointestinal problems, neurological challenges like numbness and tingling, this kind of strange motor like tapping sensation in my left foot that felt like kind of the engine of a car, just constantly tapping, fasciculations. And then, of course, that kind of leads to this anxiety and OCD and depression and kind of place of fear. I went to 45 doctors from 1997. It actually took a few months after I had had a tick bite before the symptoms really happened over the course of that weekend. Most of the doctors that I saw suggested that it was all psychological, that I should go to a psychiatrist. I did get a diagnosis back then of chronic fatigue syndrome and one of fibromyalgia. I had a practitioner that suggested exploring MS, which we did, but that was never confirmed. And in 1997, the only thing you could find about chronic fatigue syndrome was that it often would resolve in about 10 years. And for me, that was not something I was going to wait around to see if, in fact, that was true or not. So that kind of started me on my journey. In 2005, after 45 doctors of multiple disciplines, neurologists, infectious disease, I had a new medical doctor that suggested that I go work with a lady who did electrodermal screening or electroacupuncture according to Vol, essentially a computerized system of energetic testing or muscle testing. And what he suggested was that I should find out what foods were stressing my system, avoid those, and that was really probably the only explanation for what was going on with me. And so after about 2 hours of working with that practitioner, she said, I would have your practitioner test you for Borrelia, Bartonella, Babesia, and Ehrlichia. And if I had to bet, I would suspect that you're dealing with something in the realm of Lyme disease. So this lady was working at an outlet mall next to a coffee shop. It was a strange experience. I didn't really feel at that point like I had found the solution, but I ran into her a couple weeks later, and she really urged me to go get the blood test done, which I did. We were able to confirm all of those things that she identified over the course of several months and a few rounds of testing. So at that point, I started down the path of exploring Lyme disease. The energetic testing component of all this was really interesting to me. I didn't understand it at that point. But this was July of 2005 that I finally got diagnosed with Lyme disease. And so, January of 2006, I was sitting in the front row of a conference with Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt, starting to learn his methodologies and framework and his system of muscle testing. And really, he became the single biggest influence on the way that I understand and think about this. And not so much from the perspective of things that he did for treatment, which I did see him as a patient from 2006 to 2012. but really the framework, the paradigm for healing that he put out was really what helped me to kind of understand this. And so fortunately today I'm doing really well. I still take very good care of myself. I think part of the lesson of going through something like this is that we need to prioritize ourselves and really focus on self-care and be good to ourselves. But there's nothing that I can't do today. Go to the gym, work full time, all of those things. And so I'm very blessed and grateful for the experience, the gifts of the experience, the lessons of the experience, but also for the place that I've been able to get to with my health today.
Wow. That is an incredible story. Years of information put in there. Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt is amazing. So I'm sure you have lots of knowledge to share with us. And through that entire journey there, it's been, you said, more than 20 years. Has the model of how people treat for Lyme changed? And if you had to go back through this, where would you go differently?
Yeah, that's a good question. My way of looking at this today has really been shaped by Dietrich Klinghardt, by Dr. Neil Nathan, Dr. Simon Yu, Dr. Raj Patel, so many people that the universe has really been able to connect me with and align me with to um, kind of create a model in my mind of how I might approach this if I were starting over. It's constantly learning. I'm not suggesting this is a protocol or the solution for everyone. It is changing. I'm always refining kind of this idea as I learn new things. And this is an arena that we're constantly learning new things. But the steps that I've kind of come up with are essentially 11 different steps. And they are in a specific order. Doesn't mean that that order is not going to change for someone. Obviously, everyone is unique and they may have an issue that needs to be addressed earlier than someone else. But just as kind of a general model, the very first step is supporting detoxification and drainage to improve the terrain. I think that's absolutely critical. I think we don't want to jump into killing bugs early on. There's a number of things that we want to do first, and those things could be done fairly quickly. So it doesn't mean you're going to be a year or two down the road before you start looking at some of these microbial overgrowths. But I don't think the kill, kill, kill mentality is the path to higher ground in terms of health. So step one, supporting detoxification and drainage. Step two is looking at and improving the external environment. So looking at things like mold, electromagnetic fields. Step three is optimizing sleep. Step four, working on the mental, emotional contributors, past traumas and conflicts, those types of things. I think that's very important. Step five, looking at the limbic system, doing some limbic system retraining, looking at tools to support the tonification or support of the parasympathetic nervous system. Step six is stabilizing the mast cells, reducing inflammation, modulating the immune system. It's not always just about the bug, but how are we as a host interacting with that microbe. Step seven, hydration, nutrition, microbiome, gut health. So all of those things, very important to dial in before we start jumping into the microbial piece. Step eight is a number of different things. They may not apply to everyone, but exploring mitochondria, adrenals, cryptopyruria, coagulation, those things can be important to explore. Step nine is where we get into the microbial overgrowth. So looking at viruses, retroviral activation, parasites, dysbiosis, SIBO, those types of things. Also then fungal colonization potentially from mold exposure, yeast and other overgrowths, Lyme and co-infections. And then potentially, and I don't think this is always the case, but there are going to be some people then that need to do some work in the biofilm realm. And so I also feel like that's something we want to explore fairly late in the process. We don't want to open Pandora's box early in the process, which can stimulate the immune system more, release more toxins, and so on. Step 10, looking at the dental contributors. And then finally, step 11 is after you've been through this experience, what do you need to do from a regeneration and restoration perspective to support the body in further optimizing health?
All right. Well, I want to dig into that some more.
Sure.
That's quite the list of steps there with so much information. So let's just start with one.
All
So
right.
you said detoxification and drainage. What's the difference in that, and why number one? Why is it where we start?
Yeah, so in my experience, detoxification and drainage are the most important aspect of a recovery protocol. We live now in a toxic soup of chemicals and pesticides and metals and things that are at levels that we have never experienced prior to modern times. I don't think that most of us would have significant challenges from microbes alone, like Lyme and co-infections, if we didn't have this toxic burden and this terrain that was supporting them being present. So, in my mind, improving the terrain really is the road back to health. We also can look at things like candida and parasites that those may actually be present in the body as a protective mechanism because they can concentrate heavy metals. So when we're detoxifying, in some ways, I think of that as an indirect antimicrobial strategy. So we're working on improving the terrain so that we don't need to have these microbial overgrowths in our system. And then I would say one thing that we commonly forget is the easiest way to detoxify is to not have the toxin enter the body in the first place. So, reviewing your personal care products and laundry products and cleaning products and all of those kinds of things, making sure that you're getting pure air, food, and water, thinking about the toxins that we introduce into the body from other things as well, like maybe breast implants or metal implants in the body or things of that nature. And so the difference between detoxification and drainage, for me, detoxification is primarily about binders. Once we get these toxins from the liver into the bile, the gallbladder, and dumped into the small intestine, we then need those binders to grab onto them to minimize this enterohepatic recirculation of toxins back into the system. So that's what I think of as detoxification. And then drainage is more about supporting the body's innate ability to process and excrete toxins. So looking at the liver, gallbladder, kidneys, lymphatic system, extracellular matrix, colon, skin, lungs. How do we make them more efficient in supporting the elimination of these toxins? And so um, optimizing the exit routes, that's a really early priority, as well as if someone's constipated, for example, and they're not eliminating, that's going to really cause some challenges here. And so constipation and healing certainly don't go together. We need to make sure that the gut is eliminating. We don't want to forget the gallbladder, that whole bile process. We need to be able to concentrate the toxins in the bile, in the gallbladder, so that they ultimately meet up with the binders in the small intestine. So there's a lot of different products people can use, a number of them that I have found helpful when it comes to detoxification. Thinking about binders, I love the bioactive carbons from Cellcore Biosciences or Microbe Formulas. I think those have been fantastic. I love Takasumi Supreme, chlorella, bentonite clays, zeolites, lots of different options. And then when we get into drainage, some of these can be herbal support. So BioRay, for example, is a company that I love. But oftentimes what I'm thinking about here is more in the homeopathic realm. So if we're looking at things like Picana or Energetics or Physica Energetics or Deseret Biologicals, for example. So using combinations of herbs and homeopathy to really support the drainage pathways. Another thing that's important to not forget is trace minerals. And so a lot of times the reason the body is holding on to metals, for example, is that we're mineral deficient. So I think part of this detoxification strategy should be to incorporate a good trace mineral, and then making sure that we're getting whatever level of movement that we can achieve within our abilities at that point in time. And if that means just getting up and walking across the room, walking is a tremendous tool for supporting the lymphatic system. So we don't want to forget that need to keep the fluid flow moving in the body. And then a number of different tools that can be adjunct in this realm that I think are also really helpful. Coffee enemas, for example, one of the most helpful tools in my experience personally, and I would say commonly that's the experience that I hear from other people when they explore coffee enemas. Colonics, ionic foot baths, castor oil packs, oil pulling, Liver, gallbladder flushes, though I would say I think those need to be medically supervised because they can be very intense and it may not be the right time for someone. Similarly with saunas, can be a great tool, but sometimes early on it can mobilize toxins in the body as well. So you want to make sure that you're really supported before jumping into pushing yourself to do saunas. But that's essentially the difference in my mind between detoxification and drainage, is that binding versus supporting the body's innate ability to excrete toxins.
Wow. You gave a very thorough answer there. I completely agree, honestly, with detoxification and drainage being number one. It's where I start with almost everyone. I agree with the products, the therapies that you were talking about. I've even had people that were basically bedridden. They couldn't move. And I'm like, you need to move just a little bit to get your drainage going. I'm like, can you raise your arms from right next to you to over your head and back down? Can you raise your legs just a little bit? Do a little bicycle in your bed. And even that made a difference just in getting lymph moving. But every tool you mentioned, every supplement you mentioned, I've used and do like them, from homeopathic to herbal. So love it. Now, step two, you said improving our external environment. So this has to be going toward mold, since mold was such a big part of your journey and so many other pieces too. Why does this fall number two?
So I would say that our internal environment is only ever going to be as good or as healthy as our external environment. So many of us today with chronic illnesses are sick in large part because of the external environment and how toxic it's become. So I think we can take supplements all day, but if the external environment in our home, our school, our workplace, our car, if that is our kryptonite, then we are never going to regain our superhero status. It's so, so critical. And so I would say the first is mold exposure, the soup of different toxins from water damaged buildings. It goes far beyond mold, beyond mycotoxins. There's bacterias and a host of things in this soup from water damaged buildings. I think for many people with Lyme disease, and I would say my experience as well, was at one time I thought Lyme was the primary issue, but I would say the mold piece is probably more important than chasing the microbes that we think of as Lyme disease. And so most people with chronic Lyme, I would say if you dig into their history, they have a history of or a current mold exposure that is playing a significant role in their current state of health. There is no perfect test in this realm when we're talking about mold. So there are some self-tests that can be helpful. I think they're good. They're not perfect, but doing things like an ERMI, Environmental Relative Moldiness Index, which we can do from Mycometrics or Envirobiomics. There's another test that's just becoming more popular called the EMMA, which also looks for molds and mycotoxins in the environment. That's from Real-Time Labs. Plate testing like immunolytics can be helpful if you can put the plates out and you can actually see the growth. It's not always the case that the organisms that grow are pathogenic, so you then need to send it in and have it evaluated, but that can often be helpful for people to see that, well, maybe there is an issue here. And then for looking at the body, I do like the urine mycotoxin testing, whether that's Real-Time Labs or Great Plains. Is it perfect? No, but is it one of the better tools that we have at our disposal? I think that it commonly is. There are people that have concerns that some of what comes out in those tests could be normal excretion from food exposures. And I think that is certainly true. But when you see really high levels on these tests, it's probably not entirely from food exposures. There is generally an environmental component. So once we identify that there is an issue, we either need to remediate it or find a new environment. I would say most people now, in my experience and people that I've talked with, the remediation is sometimes the path to explore first, with 50 to 70% of buildings in this country having some degree of water damage. Sometimes jumping from one environment to the next doesn't necessarily solve the problem. So it is not an easy process, but it is something we have to explore. I think it saves people tremendous amounts of time, tremendous amounts of money. If someone is exploring Lyme disease as their issue and not exploring mold, I think they're really doing themselves a significant disservice. And then things like air filtration devices, they can be great. They're not a solution to the problem. So you still really need to remove the cancer before you then move on to other therapeutic interventions and before you to, start chemotherapy. You want the tumor gone before you start, doing things like air filters, which you actually can do earlier, but you're not going to expect them to be the solution to the problem if you don't find that material that's damaged and actually have it removed. So once we've eliminated the exposure, then incorporating some of the binders that we talked about can be great. There are some targeted tools in the mold and mycotoxin realm. Microbe Formulas Biotox is a great tool. Beyond Balance, Toxease Bind, I think can be very helpful. Takasumi Supreme, again. There are people that cholestyramine and Welcol and things like that can be helpful. But I personally, even if those are in someone's protocol, and those are pharmaceutical binders, I like to still have some natural binding agents in the protocol. I think that cholestyramine and Welcol might be deeper than some of the natural binders, but they're not as broad in my experience. And so I often think a combination of those can be helpful if someone needs the pharmaceutical interventions. And then when we talk about microbes, some people may need to also, and we'll get to that in step 9, but some people may need to think about the potential for fungal colonization. So if you were breathing in aspergillus day after day and week after week, month after month, is it possible that you have aspergillus colonization in your sinuses and gut, that then even if you get to a completely clean environment, you may be producing mycotoxins in your own body? I think that does happen. There is some debate about it. Not everyone agrees that colonization happens, but in my experience and the people that I tend to talk to, I think that is a very real probability. And so once we have explored and ruled out and mitigated the mold piece, I think a very significant step in terms of our recovery. We've now completed that and we're moving on. I cannot stress enough how important this is to explore. If you skip the mold piece and move on to the other steps and start dealing with the bugs and whatnot, I just really don't think most people will have the same level of recovery or a sustained recovery. And then once we get past the mold piece, considering the electromagnetic fields, Dr. Klinghart's talked about that since at least when I first started following him in 2006. Back then, people laughed most of the time that he talked about that. Now I think they take him much more seriously. The exponential increase in electromagnetic fields, I think that keeps us in a sympathetic dominant state. It minimizes our ability to detoxify. So things like getting rid of cordless phones, turning off Wi-Fi when you don't absolutely need it, sleeping in a Faraday cage, which I've done since 2006 at Dr. Klinghart's recommendation, turning off the circuit breakers to the bedroom at night so that you don't have the electrical stress. That can actually be really helpful as well. So reducing exposures to EMFs as much as you can. I've done all of those things and I'm constantly looking for ways to minimize that as the environmental sources of EMF continue to increase. So I think that people can get meters and do some testing on their own. But if you have a building biologist, which I fortunately did here in Northern California, to be able to come out and bring their 5 different meters and make some recommendations for how to improve things, I think that can be incredibly helpful. And then with the EMF piece, I think it's also important to recognize that EMF sensitivity is correlated to the level of heavy metals in the body. So another reason why the detoxification and drainage piece comes so early, if you have electromagnetic hypersensitivity syndrome, really focusing on detoxification can longer term help you to minimize that sensitivity that you have to the EMFs.
All right. Well, as you were mentioning, so many things there. You said building biologist. And I work with a lot of clients that don't know what a building biologist is. So I wanted to make sure and step out and say, hey, this is a person whose specialty is figuring out what's going on in your home, whether it's mold, EMFs, so many other different issues that could happen in your home. And they're not just your mold remediator. They are much more highly trained and are very, very helpful. So if you're dealing with mold and you don't know what to do, you can't find it the easy ways with Ermi or Emma, call your building biologist or just call them first, because it's incredibly helpful to have somebody that's a specialist looking at your house versus you who probably just found out that there was a problem. All right. So you said step 3 time, optimizing sleep, which can be so difficult. It can be so hard to get someone to sleep when their body is in a fight or flight mechanism. They're dealing with mold, they're dealing with Lyme, their hormones are all over the place. So how do we do this?
Yeah, this is an area that fortunately through most of my journey, I slept beautifully until about a year and a half ago. And so I have been exploring this step a lot myself in the last maybe year and a half. One of the things to think about first when it comes to sleep is that EMFs are probably one of the primary reasons that people deal with insomnia. So again, that's why the EMF step or the environment step comes very early in this process so that we're hopefully creating an environment that's more supportive of good sleep. There's lots of supplements out there. I've tried many of them. I haven't found too many of them to make a huge difference. I have very recently started using a product called Qualia Night, Qualia. It's the first of their products I've ever used. And I have to say the difference in my sleep and even as measured by my Aura ring has been really profound with that supplement, much more than I ever expected. But I don't think it's just one thing. I think you have to create a sleep sanctuary, essentially minimize, or get rid of TVs and computers and cell phones charging on your nightstand and things of that nature. um, I do like to measure these things with the Aura ring and really look for patterns. So I have tried a number of different tools. I use a Z's Sleep Pebble, Zeez Sleep Pebble, which you put under your pillow, and it puts out frequencies that are really supportive of keeping the brain in a state that will support healthy sleep. I won't say that it has been phenomenal for me, but I do feel like it has been helpful, and I do know other people that it has been very helpful for. There's other tools that are just emerging. There's the Apollo Neuroband, which I'm just starting to explore, that uses vibration and also has some programs to support sleep. Another big thing that I just did about 2 months ago, I would say, was inclined bed therapy. And it's such a cheap, easy thing to do. And I don't know why I didn't think about this sooner or didn't come across it and take it seriously. So it's essentially, getting the uh, lifts that you can put under all four corners of the bed if you wanted to put something underneath them, but you're just putting them under the two corners at the head of the bed so that you have an incline of about 6 inches at the top of the bed. And so that actually supports drainage and helps the body from a sleep perspective. There's a number of articles that show that that can be significant for many different reasons, but that has also been very helpful. So a number of things that I think we often have to incorporate to help sleep, but looking at the environment, minimizing the EMFs, using some supplements potentially, and then some of these devices like the Apollo or the Z Sleep Pebble and so on. I think some of those have some great potential here as well.
All right. Well, sleep is one of the hardest things for some people to get. So I'm loving hearing that. I actually had not heard of a couple of pieces of technology. So I'm going to have to look into those myself. All right. Step 4, mental and emotional health can be one of the most difficult things to get through because if you're detoxing and herxing and you're having any kind of depression, anxiety, it can stop you in your tracks. So after so many of the people that are listening to this have heard it's all in your head, what do you have to say about this?
Yeah, it's interesting. When I started learning from Dr. Klinghardt, my model was kill the bug, detoxify, and then the emotional piece was the last thing on the list. And those are the three elements of what he then called the Klinghardt axiom. And now that model has completely flipped for me, where I think the mental emotional work is really probably the most important. Getting into then some of the limbic system work, which is really not mental and emotional. And we'll talk about that. And I intentionally separate them because I think some people are hesitant to do limbic system work because it essentially kind of re-traumatizes them in thinking how they were treated by the medical community with a real condition that they were told was more psychological. But the emotional traumas and conflicts, I think that those can set the stage for us to later develop a condition like Lyme disease or mold illness or whatever the complex chronic condition might be. Or I think the invalidation that we often experience from our friends, family, medical community can itself create a trauma. And so whether the trauma came before or after the illness, I think we then need to explore it and really work on that to shift things in a positive direction. in my experience in the Lyme community, particularly, I would say that a very common pattern is type A, overachiever, perfectionist. Oftentimes, people maybe don't feel like they deserve to be well. So I pride myself on saying that I'm a type A plus that has now become a type A minus, because I know I'm not going to become a type B. But I think that, there is a lot of that perfectionist drive. Why do we have to prove ourselves to the world? All of that over a period of time can run down our adrenals, our immune system, and so on, and really set the stage for these types of conditions. So cultivating healthy relationships, eliminating toxic people, experiencing joy in every way we can find, doing everything we can do to not identify with the illness. So I never felt comfortable with the term Limey as an example. I just didn't want to take that on. It's a part of my experience, but it's not who I am. And then when we come back to looking at the Klinghardt model and his 5 levels of healing, this is third level work, so the mental emotional work, and there is a downward effect that things that we do at that level do have an impact on the physical body. And so some of those interventions can be much more powerful than things that we do just on more of a physical level. I would say some of the tools that I have found helpful are things like EMDR. Dr. Klinghardt has created the applied psychoneurobiology or psychokinesiology. There's tools like EFT, emotional freedom technique, emotion code. And then for people that are open to this and want to explore it, and maybe in a way where they can start exploring it on their own, there is an energy practitioner that I really like, Amy B. Scher, and she has a book called How to Heal Yourself When No One Else Can, that gets into how we also work to release the energetic imprint of some of these emotional traumas and conflicts from our field, essentially. And so I find that her work is very empowering for people that feel like starting to explore that.
Well, I'd say I have to agree with a lot of what you said. I always tell people that it's the chemical, physical, emotional, and mental things that you have to work on to get through this journey. And so often, many of us forget about the emotional, mental pieces that we have to dive into. And those can be so much of it. And I also see so many people that have had very terrible childhoods or had situations happen to them. I ask people all the time, what happened right before you got sick? The year before, 2 years before, was there a divorce? Was there something that set the stage? Were you out and led to something like this happening where you were susceptible? So make sure you pay attention to the mental, emotional side of all of this. All right, step 5, here we go. I'm interested to hear what tools you have for this, because you brought up so many for the others. With retraining the limbic system, tonifying the vagus nerve, and addressing the parasympathetic nervous system, what are your tools? What are your tricks? What are you going to see this like?
Yeah, so I think this is one of the steps that potentially could move earlier or later in the process, depending on what someone's needs are. When we're talking about the limbic system, we're talking about the hypothalamus, the amygdala, the hippocampus. So this is where when someone says, oh, the condition is in your head, what they usually mean is it's in your mind, which I don't agree with. What we're talking about with limbic system is it's in your brain, which I do agree with. So it's a difference between mental, emotional, and actually a physical situation with the limbic system. And so I think sometimes people are hesitant to get into this realm because it gets them back into the mental, emotional realm, but that's really not what it is. And when we look at the limbic system and its impact on the autonomic nervous system, the immune system, the endocrine system, all of this has far-reaching implications. And so a number of different things can trigger limbic system impairment. It can be exposure to mold. It can be EMFs, parasites, chemicals, pesticides, viruses, physical, mental, emotional stress. There's so many different things that can trigger limbic system impairment. And I would say if you have a threat like mold or Lyme disease and it's still your tiger, meaning it hasn't been addressed, you may not want to jump into these systems at the very beginning. Ideally, you want to address the tiger so that it's now a kitten that is a smaller issue that's not a real threat that your body needs to respond in a heightened way. And then you use tools like DNRS or the Gupta program and so on to recalibrate your body's alarm center or ability to sense what's safe or not in the environment, so that when there is a small exposure to something like a chemical or mold or whatever, that you don't have that same response that you had when it was a larger and a true physical threat for you at one point in time. So I think DNRS is a tool that I personally did and found very helpful. There are other tools. The Gupta program is one that people also talk about being very helpful. And then things like Brain Tap, Dr. Patrick Porter, he's created this headset that has sound and light in the headset piece, and also a visor that flashes at different rates to help kind of calm the brain and work with the parasympathetic nervous system. I think that is a very helpful tool that I've been surprised how many people have very obvious changes in their health, and sometimes very significant progress just implementing that tool, where they can really get the nervous system to kind of calm down. If we're not in a parasympathetic state, then we're not resting, we're not digesting, we're not detoxifying. And I think that's a big piece, is if you're constantly in this sympathetic state, your body doesn't need to focus on detoxifying. It needs to focus on whatever that perceived threat is that's going to kill you. So very important to work on this parasympathetic support. Another tool that I have found tremendously helpful for both limbic system and vagus nerve, for example, is frequency specific microcurrent. And so that is a tool that has very broad application, but it can be programmed to support the limbic system and the vagus nerve as well. The ionic foot baths that I mentioned in the detox piece, some of them actually put parasympathetic supporting frequencies into the water that's being used as part of the foot bath. And that's part of how the ion cleanse, for example, that's part of how it helps to support detoxification, is by shifting the body into a parasympathetic state. So I think it's very important to remember that we cannot heal when we're in a fight, flight, or freeze mode, that we really have to calm the nervous system, calm the limbic system, support the vagus nerve. More and more coming out about the vagus nerve. Stephen Porges and Stanley Rosenbaum, they have a lot of work in this realm. There's a book called Accessing the Healing Power of the Vagus Nerve that has some very simple exercises in that book that you can do that maybe take about 5 minutes a day, that can be very helpful in supporting the vagus nerve and the parasympathetic nervous system.
Awesome. These are some huge pieces. I use neurofeedback from ClearMind, which is similar to the Brain Tap, and I have seen incredible changes in people. People couldn't sleep, wouldn't eat, depressed, anxious, have a total turnaround. I will just say though, if you do this early on, my experience has been that you still have to go after the Lyme mold metal parasites to get it out, or some of those benefits tend to fade away, is what I've seen.
I would agree. Yep.
All right. Well, step 6, mast cell stabilizing, reduction in inflammation, modulating the immune response. These are some major pieces. Mast cell can be a huge, huge block for people being able to move into herbs and other supplements that is very difficult to get through. I know that I personally work with so many people where we have to start with microdosing. We start with pulsing methods to try to overcome some of this. What are you seeing in these areas that you can help others with?
Yeah, and I would say a lot of times when people are struggling to incorporate supplements, I think the limbic system focus that we just talked about often will really open the toolbox up, so that the practitioner has more ability to use different supplements and such. But the mast cell activation piece, immune modulation, inflammation, again, it's not about killing the bug. The bug itself is not what makes the disease. It is our immune response. And if we have a hyperactive, overactive, autoimmune leaning immune system, that is often what's creating the inflammation, that's creating the symptoms that we experience as our illness or disease, for example. So it may not be the presence of the bug, but how our immune system is overreacting to it. And so a lot of the inflammation that people experience is from mast cell activation syndrome. A primary trigger of that can be mold exposure. I think that's probably one of the most significant. Parasites, electromagnetic fields, I think, are also huge. Dr. Theo Heridas at one of the conferences that I was at where he spoke said that mast cells are 10 times more active in the presence of a cell phone, which this was just a year or two ago that I heard him say that. And even knowing what I've learned along the way, that statement for me was really profound. I mean, it's just amazing. 10 times more active in the presence of a cell phone. Other things that can trigger mast cell activation and all the environmental toxins, food, supplements, in some cases, temperature changes, physical, emotional stress. So there's a number of things that can be triggers for mast cell activation. So I think we oftentimes want to stabilize the mast cells, reduce the histamine response so that we're reducing inflammation. But that's not the solution. We then need to, as you mentioned just a few minutes ago, that we then need to focus on what are the underlying triggers. And so I think you have to do those things simultaneously. Diet plays a big role here. I would say for many people in the Lyme and mold community, of all the different diets, I think low histamine is probably one of the first ones to explore. I think we oftentimes don't realize that things like kombucha or avocados or bone broth or fermented foods, I think we think those are healthy, but in someone with mast cell activation, they may actually be contributing to inflammation. And then a lot of natural agents that can be tremendously helpful here. So quercetin, luteolin, holy basil. Holy basil checks a lot of boxes beyond just the mast cell activation piece. Neuroprotect from Dr. Theo Heridas. Probiotic Histaminix from Ben Lynch. Quicksilver has HistaAid from Dr. Chris Shade. So many tools. There are some pharmaceutical tools in this realm as well, ketotifen, chromalin, and so on, that can be really helpful. And I think that once you start addressing the diet, incorporating some of the mast cell stabilizers and histamine reducers, that people often do feel a lot better. They feel a lot of their symptoms dissipating or resolving. And then we also want to look at immune modulating therapies. So things like low dose naltrexone, or I personally am a fan of low dose immunotherapy from Dr. Ty Vincent. Some of the peptides like thymosin alpha 1 and thymosin beta 4 could potentially be helpful. Using homeopathics can be helpful for modulating the immune system. So we just want to remember that getting well is not all about boosting the immune system, that it's really more about modulating it. If we're trying to boost the immune system and we have this hyperactive immune response already, we're probably going to make things worse. So modulation, calming, integrating with our microbes is really the focus of this particular step.
I love it. Great advice. There are so many people out there that needed to hear that and that need steps to get through that. We see it all the time going through our group on the messaging board. So thank you.
Sure.
All right. Well, step 7 is about optimizing hydration, nutrition, microbiome, and gut health. You know, I've got stories for days about people who come in who do detoxing, like we said in step 1, but then drink 25 ounces of water a day. It just can't be done. You have to have hydration to be able to detox. So, what are you finding to be helpful here? What tools are helpful?
Yeah, so drinking adequate water, I think, is important. But a lot of times in these biotoxin illnesses, it may not actually be absorbed. And so that's why people tend to drink a lot, pee it all out, and still cellularly are dehydrated. So I think things like structuring water, whether that's with something like the natural action water system or the Somavedic, there's a number of things that can help structure the water. I think that can be a good way to help the fluid or water that we're drinking be more absorbed by the system. Putting some electrolytes or trace minerals or sea salt in the water can also be great. There are some homeopathics, like Energetics has one called Rehydration that I really like for supporting the body's ability to hydrate itself. And then there are more and more waters that are emerging, like Wattah, Wattahh, I believe, that are really hydrating and for a lot of people really helpful. The challenge I have with some of these tools is by the time you pay for shipping of heavy water, it may not always be a cost-effective thing to do. So I do like the structuring. The nutritional side of it, when we think about the immune system also really coming from the gut, if we have leaky gut, we're triggering more of that immune dysregulation, more of the mast cell reactions that we just talked about. So I think it's important to remove the triggering foods. From my perspective, gluten is really non-negotiable for somebody in the Lyme and mold realm. I think it really needs to go. Dairy is probably bad for some people, not everyone. I personally don't have cow dairy except for maybe occasionally small amount of cheese or something like that. Sugar is probably bad for most of us. High histamine foods, if you're on that mast cell activation syndrome population, certainly need to be eliminated at least for a period of time. And then all of the different diets. There's so many different diets, whether it's paleo or autoimmune or keto or FODMAP and so on. In my experience, the low histamine has been the one that many people do seem to benefit from. So that might be one to explore first, and then everyone's going to be different. So fortunately, there are a lot of different options that are available. What we do eat, I think, should be as highly nutrient dense as possible. So healthy fats, healthy proteins. I personally wake up every morning really excited to have my power shake with high quality protein and collagen powder, which some people need to be cautious about if they're really dealing with mast cell activation and histamine, fiber, phospholipids, flaxseed, healthy fats, things like that, that really have been very helpful for me from a, regaining muscle perspective and feeling really good. And then the microbiome, I think there are a number of tools that have emerged over the past few years that I think are very, very helpful. So things like Megaspore Biotic, which fortunately seems to be fairly well tolerated, in fact, very well tolerated in mast cell activation or SIBO in most people, and really getting those keystone strains to help optimize the diversity of the microbiome. It also can help with inflammation, immune modulation, and so on. So I do like the Megaspore Biotic. I like what was called Restore, that's now called Ion Biome, Ion Gut Health, I believe, from Dr. Zach Bush, can be a good tool. BPC 157, which you can get orally, can be very helpful for intestinal hyperpermeability and leaky gut syndrome. So really dialing in hydration, nutrition, supporting the microbiome, I think those are foundational pieces of building a good protocol.
I had a thought as you were going through that. You mentioned low histamine diets. With some of my mast cell clients, I've been finding doing some fasting, some water fasting, up to 3 days, getting that good reset in the immune system that they've shown in research has been an incredibly helpful tool for allowing me to start some of the protocols I want to start. So if they're capable, which means that we look through their blood work, make sure that their body is able to fast, that they have a proper liver function, kidney function, that they're not constitutionally weak, which would be a homeopathic term there that I've picked up. But if we can fast, we do fast, and that reduces the inflammation. They can say they feel the inflammation reduce out of their body, and then we start with drainage. And by just doing those concurrently, we get enough toxicity out that we're able to move forward. And it seems like mast cells overreactivity seems to just go away. So I wanted to throw that out there because it's been something that I've discovered really recently has become an incredible opening tool for me, which I used to use it more at the end.
And therein, my earlier comment that this model is constantly evolving, because that's a fantastic tip.
All right. Well, we just talked about step 7. So here we go to 8. Now, adding supportive interventions such as mitochondrial support, KPU, coagulation, and adrenals. What are you going to do with these?
Yeah, so probably the adrenal and mitochondrial conversation is coming more together in some circles. So I know you also follow Dr. Todd Watts, for example. And so there is some thought now that the adrenal piece may not be as significant as supporting the mitochondria. I think there certainly are some people that need adrenal support, but the mitochondrial piece has really emerged for me over the past few years as an area to explore. Things like, CoQ10 and PQQ and so on. There's different materials that are either precursors to or actual NAD, for example. I think one of the challenges where you have to be a little careful with mitochondria is if someone is in a cell danger response from Dr. Bob Naviau's work at UCSD, if they're in that cell danger response, the danger signal is extracellular ATP. So there may be some people where aggressively supporting mitochondria at the beginning might reinforce that cell danger response. And so I think for a lot of sensitive people, you either have to do this later or you have to just start very slowly in introducing the mitochondrial support. So the adrenal piece as well, number of different things. Holy basil that I mentioned earlier can be great for adrenals also, a number of different adaptogens. Cryptopyrroluria is a concept that I learned about from Dr. Klinghardt probably almost 15 years ago. And essentially, this is something that in his Lyme disease and related condition population, he sees in about 80% of people, where we pee out zinc and B vitamins, and thus the immune system becomes an army without bullets, as he often will say. So that can be an important area to explore and support zinc and B vitamins and some of the other cofactors like biotin and so on. So cryptopyrroluria, fairly easy. You can either, there's some questionnaires, there's also tests that you can do if you want to explore that. But I think for longer term immune support, making sure that you're not dealing with a pyroluria KPU type condition is something that's important. And I would caution people not to go too fast here, because if you introduce high levels of zinc, and I'm telling you this from personal experience before I really understood this, you can mobilize a lot of heavy metals and create a lot of inflammation and really trigger mast cells. So I think KPU is an important area to explore, but to explore it more like a marathon and not a sprint, and not be too aggressive. I really think in general, if the body is giving us a signal that what we're doing is too aggressive, it probably is too aggressive, and that we shouldn't force the body. And that's been a challenge for me, because I came from that type A plus personality. Now I realize sometimes the body just needs a nudge in the right direction and not so much a kick in the face. Another piece that we talk about here is coagulation. This has been a significant part of my journey as well. We won't be able to get into really any detail on it here, but I did a podcast with Dr. Ann Corson, who's one of my heroes in this realm. And she's the one that really reinforced for me the importance of hypercoagulation. So thick blood that can be the result of many things, but primarily mold, babesia, heavy metals. And then you can run tests through LabCorp or whoever to explore this possibility, and then incorporating enzymes like lumbrokinase, nattokinase, and so on, so that the blood is not as thick, so you're getting better oxygen delivery, better nutrient delivery. Very, very important in these protocols. And in fact, a couple of times over the years where I was doing better and then had some setbacks, it was commonly that the coagulation cascade had been triggered again, and I needed some of those enzymatic support in order to address the coagulopathy.
Oh, I definitely haven't talked about that too often, but I do see it, especially with working with very chronic patients. I see some very thick blood in the labs, often associated with mold. I did want to jump in on that mitochondrial talk. I am great friends with Dr. Watts. He is all over the mitochondrial work. And they talk about putting it in very early in their cell core protocols. For some people, that can be a good step, usually people that are not quite as sick. For those who are a little more sensitive, and especially for children with autoimmune conditions like PANDAS, it can be a major setback if we start there. I have to save the mitochondrial work usually till mid to late protocols, and mito ATP, although it is one of my favorite things, I take it every single day. I don't even think about putting that in early with PANDAS, and I'm very, very hesitant for those who are very sensitive to detox and drainage at the beginning. So as much as I love mitochondria and Dr. Watts, I'm still going to go with adrenal support on
Yeah,
them.
he's amazing. I agree, and I like the Mito ATP, Mito Restore as well. And I agree with you. It's a matter of the timing piece for some people that still have some other triggers for cell danger response, I think. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. All right. So step 9. Everybody's been waiting for it. Today's talk was Lyme, the critters, the bugs. I actually had my office manager design my website. And I said, yeah, make a page about the bugs. She actually made a page that said bugs. And I was like, no, it's got to say infections online. And she got so mad at me because she thought I meant really to make one about bugs. And I was like, well, I mean, that's what I call them with my patients. We got to have fun. We're talking about being really sick. We got to have some fun. We got to keep it lighthearted. You said critters. So how do we support our body with all of these microbial overgrowths?
Yeah, so this is really intentionally step 9 towards the end. I don't think that killing as a priority leads us to higher ground and stable higher ground long term. So it may seem like the place to start. I think that that's an easy direction to go, but I think the foundational pieces being in place first can really help here, particularly the mast cell activation piece, the inflammation piece, the immune modulation. I find that if you do those things right, then you don't necessarily always need to be as aggressive when you get to the microbial piece, that you don't have to always use a hammer to solve the problem. And so once we're really supporting the body against these different pathogens, the order is going to change as well for different people. I would say a general guideline, and this comes from in some parts from Dr. Klinghart's work and Dr. Simon Yu and others, but I generally think the viral and retroviral piece first. I think we have a lot of these activations of opportunistic viruses, whether that's Epstein-Barr, HHV6, herpes zoster, actually, even in people that don't develop shingles, I think plays a big role in these conditions that we often don't think about. So looking at the viruses, the retroviral activation, next, I would think about parasites, dysbiosis, gut, SIBO, those types of things. Fungal colonization, if you had mold exposure or you have yeast issues like Candida, for example. And then the Lyme and co-infections, maybe then some biofilm support. So I think these viruses, they do play a big role. So I like to get some support early on for those. The retroviral activation, not everybody has kind of latched onto that idea. That really for me came from Dr. Klinghart's work, and I do think that it's an important piece. But there's a number of tools that we can use. I like BioPure, which is a company that does a lot of work based on Dr. Klinghart. So they have some tools called Cystis, for example. There's a Cystis tincture, a Cystis tea. There's a product called NV, which I like a lot. They have a whole probably 5 or 6 different products in that viral realm. Beyond Balance has a number of them, Byron White formulas. The foundation product from Microbe Formulas or Virad Chem from Cellcore Biosciences is actually one that I find tremendously helpful in this realm, both in the viral and retroviral piece. So that's one of my favorite tools here. And then a number of different nutrients, whether it's sulforaphane from broccoli sprouts or pantothene, selenium, lysine, things like that. And then coming back to some of the homeopathics, I like some of the homeopathics from companies like Energetics or Desbio, for example, that can kind of help modulating that immune response to the viruses. Then we get into parasites and SIBO and dysbiosis. I think the parasite piece is much more common than most people think about. The testing is really poor. I find that a combination of things like para-wellness research and Dr. D'Angelo, where he's looking at stool and urine, combined with some type of energetic testing, whether it's Dr. Klinghart's ART or muscle testing or Zyto or Asyra, Quest 4. There's a number of these different tools. So I think we maybe need to look at that in a few different ways. The GI map, diagnostics, GI health panels, some of those can be helpful as well. But just because they do not find a parasite doesn't mean that there's not a parasite present. So I think of parasites as 2 different things. We have more of the worms, and then we have the protozoan organisms that also play a big role. So things like Giardia or Cryptosporidium, for example. I do like Dr. David Jernigan has a product called Paragen that I've used for years and found very, very helpful. I like combining the herbals with some type of homeopathic, like Paracord from Energetics is a great tool. Many companies have homeopathics that can help in this realm as well. Microbe Formulas has a number of great tools for parasites, as we both know. Beyond Balance, Byron White, there's a ton of tools that we can use here. One of the things that's important when we're dealing with parasites is the potential that killing parasites is then re-releasing heavy metals into the system. So we want to make sure that that detoxification and drainage piece is being supported. I think for most of us that have these conditions, detoxification and drainage is a lifelong thing that we incorporate into our routine. We want to make sure we don't take the focus off of it, particularly when we're killing parasites or killing fungus like Candida. With SIBO, I would say there is a pathogen component, but long term, there's also commonly a neurological component, a vagus nerve, a migrating motor complex issue. So SIBO is not just about dealing with a microbial overgrowth, but also looking at what's happening from a neurological perspective in many cases. And then, a host of other pathogens that can affect the digestive tract, whether it's Klebsiella, H. pylori, and so on. So I do like the Megaspore Biotic here. Biocidin is a great tool. Moving on to thinking about the fungal organisms. Now, this is where we could be talking about Candida, but we could also be talking about needing to address fungal colonization from water damage building exposure, things like aspergillus, for example. Lots of tools in that realm. Some people do fine with the herbal options or homeopathic options. Some practitioners might incorporate something like itraconazole, for example, which is a pharmaceutical. But the fungal organisms definitely are something to explore. And then finally, in this step 9, I start thinking about, okay, Lyme and co-infections. So Borrelia, Bartonella, Babesia, Ehrlichia, the opportunistic pathogens like Mycoplasma, Chlamydia, pneumonia, for example. And fortunately, there's been a lot of tools that have emerged in this realm since my original Lyme diagnosis in 2005. At that time, the option was you're going to do antibiotics, which I did for 3 years. It would not be the path that I would take again now. I'm open to antibiotics, but I would be much more targeted about it. I do think they help some people, but I think if people are relatively functional, that exploring the natural options first makes a lot of sense. And so there are tools from Beyond Balance, Byron White, Nutrimetics, MAPA Herbals. There's some tools that are fantastic as well from Microbe Formulas or Cellcore Biosciences. So looking at Lyme and co-infections, and then I think starting out by layering this approach to looking at Lyme and co-infections, not trying to kill, if you will, or address Borrelia, Babesia, Bartonella all at the same time. That's probably going to be too much for many people. So you might layer in, starting with, let's say, Bartonella, if that's your bigger issue, and then, weeks or months later working on Borrelia. There might be some overlap, but I think that layering here is important. And then finally, if someone needs to explore the biofilms, this might be the place to do it. I don't think you want to do this too early. I think that if you really start breaking down biofilms, you can release a lot of microbes and metals and other toxins into circulation. You can trigger the immune system. You can trigger the mast cells. You can trigger the histamine. So I think this has to be done carefully. I would say more and more, coming from Dr. Klinghart's teaching, Cystis T, for example, is more of a selective biofilm breaker or inhibitor rather than using some of the heavy duty products that might break down biofilms, but then are they also breaking down healthy biofilms? And so, it's an area to explore, I think, cautiously and with a practitioner. And again, I think that the natural herbal type options can be great, but there are some things that are still emerging in the pharmaceutical realm that are, I think, bringing the Lyme community a lot of hope. So disulfiram, for example, has been helpful for many people. Dr. Richard Horowitz has been talking about his double dapsone protocol. So I definitely keep an open mind, and until we have solutions that lead people to, the cure word, I think it's important to be open to all of the potential tools that are out there. But in this realm in general, for microbial support, BioPure, Dr. Bill Rawls with Vital Plan, Dr. Leibowitz with Supreme Nutrition Products, Beyond Balance, Des Bio, MAPA Herbals, I mentioned, Research Nutritionals, Nutrimetics. I mean, there's so many great companies and tools out there now as compared to 15 years ago when I was going through this, that I think the landscape has really changed a lot.
And I do love how you said layered, and make sure you pick your place to start correctly. I do have one little bit to put in there. Sometimes when you're going through that, supporting the liver, the gallbladder, the colon, I find that parasites need to be first just to get them out of the way so you can detox. Oftentimes, when you're doing things like your coffee enemas and your gallbladder flushes. Just had a woman the other day who very, very sensitive, was really struggling to get through her protocols. I said, well, let's do a gallbladder flush because there's some belching happening, and that's a symptom that oftentimes signals me we need to support the gallbladder. She said about 150, what she called stones come out. I know there's some debate on what it is that's coming out, but stones came out. For the next 4 days, every time that she would go to the bathroom, she had about 70 stones. She did a coffee enema, had another 100 stones. And
Wow.
now she's going through protocols with no problem.
Yeah, she's got to be feeling a lot better for
And
sure.
with all that coming out, she also had a bunch of liver flukes come out.
Yeah.
So addressing some of those things that clog you up for me is sometimes a start point. But yes, retroviruses and parasites seem to feed on each other.
Yeah,
So
no, I absolutely agree. And I think the order definitely can change. And even though this is step 9, that doesn't mean it's, 9 months or 9 years down the road. But absolutely agree with you that in some cases, the elimination organs could be stressed by parasites or other organisms that need to be explored.
that's where I love Dr. Klinghardt and his muscle testing techniques, Dr. Jernigan and his, Dr. Watts and his, and they're all different techniques, but they all work extremely well and help you to identify when to start each protocol. Because if you're just looking at symptoms, it's very difficult to know when, how.
Absolutely.
So, all right, we're continuing on step 10. Dental. Dental can be an expensive place to go, but it is an absolutely necessary place for many people, especially with the amalgams, the cavitations. If you don't know what a cavitation is, it's basically a hole in your mouth that can house things like Lyme. So, why so late in the process?
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned the cavitation piece. I remember years ago, there was a book put out by an Olympian, Perry Fields, called The Tick Slayer. And I read her chapter on cavitations, and she talked about having this black oozing stuff coming out of her mouth during her cavitation surgery. And I thought, in fact, I think I was reading her book while doing a coffee enema, if I must be truthful. And I think that at the time, I was like, oh, thank God I never had to deal with this. And subsequent to that, I went to a conference with Dr. Simon Yu and said, well, I'm here, I might as well have you check me out. And he identified 2 cavitations. And so I ended up going down that experience personally. And fortunately, it was not as bad as I had created it to be in my mind previously. But, I think part of the reason that this is later in the process is that you want to set the stage in many cases first. So the retroviral piece, based on Dr. Klinghardt's work, those retroviruses play a role in a lot of the dental issues that people have. So oftentimes he finds that if you support the retroviral piece early on, that the dental procedures tend to heal better, lead people to higher ground. Similarly, Dr. Simon Yu, commonly, if somebody has parasites, he will address the parasites first and get them to a more stable place before they do the dental work. For some people, this may end up being step number 1. It really depends. But looking at, the basics, amalgams, root canals, cavitations, and so on, really can be very important. I suspect that in my case, the cavitation probably set the stage for some of what eventually happened with my health. I mean, my wisdom teeth had been taken out when I was in high school, and probably had, in fact, I did have dry sockets at the time that I knew about, but didn't know anything about cavitations. Dentists, for the most part, don't know anything about cavitations. And so I think that probably was a smoldering kind of drain on my immune system for many, many years. But looking at what are the dental contributors, what can we do to lift some of those weights off of the body? And then even beyond just the amalgams and root canals and cavitations and so on, the tonsils can play a big role. And I know you do a lot of work with pandas. And if in those people that are dealing with strep, sometimes the tonsils can be a focal or an interference field, essentially. In my case, tonsils used to come up quite often working with Dr. Klinghardt. And I went to Germany and did regenerative cryotherapy on my tonsils on 2 different occasions, which was tremendously helpful. But, really thinking about the microbiome as well, the pathogens that we have in the mouth do affect us in a big way systemically. Dr. Dale Bredesen's work looking at people with Alzheimer's, for example, and finding different bacteria, Treponema denticola, and others from the oral cavity that they actually find in the brain of people with dementia and Alzheimer's. So at a minimum, putting in a really good oral care routine. And that might be things like oral defense from Supreme Nutrition or dental Sidon from Biobotanical Research. Some people like to use essential oils for brushing or oil pulling and so on. So lots of tools here, but I do think that exploring the amalgams, root canals, and cavitations is important, with the caveat that it should be with a biological dentist and should be coordinated in terms of timing with whoever's guiding your broader care, because I have seen a number of people that have done the dental interventions with someone who didn't understand how to safely remove an amalgam in someone with a chronic illness, and that actually made them significantly worse. So timing is important, working with the biological dentist important, setting the stage by dealing with the retroviral activation and the parasite piece may be important for some people as well.
I've seen it be an incredible leap forward, getting some of those amalgams and cavitations taken care of. I love the step 10 there, even though, like you said, it could be anywhere within that depending upon your specific situation. So your final step here, regeneration and restoration. Tell me a little bit more about what you would do for this.
Yeah, so I think that by the time we've spent, in many cases, years going through this process of identifying what's wrong with us and getting better, that that process has taken its toll on our system, that we need to think about things to focus on regeneration, health optimization, and so on. And so phospholipids, phosphatidylcholine, and the whole blend of lipids can be really helpful for increasing or improving the health of the cell walls. So I do use that orally every day, but there's also a number of people that benefit from things like the Patricia Kane protocol or PK protocol, which is a series of IV therapies, can be really helpful for supporting the body in regeneration. Peptides are emerging as a tool that I think have some potential. It's a little tricky with some of the FDA and regulations and trying to figure out where these fit in the broader landscape. But I do think that they have great potential for repairing, restoring, and regenerating, and really can be helpful in this step. I like photobiomodulation. So this kind of ties back in as well as another tool that can help with the mitochondrial piece. So using things like Juve or Rejuvenator, I actually use both of those tools. They can also help with rebuilding of collagen, which is oftentimes an issue in people that have dealt with Lyme disease that need that additional collagen support, structural support. There are a number of people that are exploring, stem cells and exosomes and things like that. I haven't personally found those to be significantly helpful, but I do think that they will continue to advance and potentially will play a role over time. One of the tools that I found amazing for regeneration and restoration is one that unfortunately with the pandemic this year, I've not been able to access, but it was a tool called Vasper, VASPER, which essentially you put these cuffs on your upper arms and legs. It uses constriction. They're kind of like a blood pressure cuff, while it's also running water through them that's about 45 degrees. And so it essentially, while you're doing this, it's almost like an exercise bike, but while you're doing it with the compression and the cold, you're tricking the body into thinking that there's an injury that there is not. And so it releases more growth hormone and other repair factors and so on. And I think that is a tremendously helpful tool. I'm looking forward to hopefully being able to get back to it at some point. It's an expensive tool to purchase for home use, so it's someplace that you generally have to go. But I think that Vasper is another tool in this realm that can be really, really helpful.
All right. Well, we have a few questions left out here that people have posted. Can I ask you?
Sure. Sure.
All right. So for everybody watching, we can't actually see the questions come up as they go. It's a Zoom, but I can see them on my handy dandy little phone. So here we go. Can you take immune modulating herbs with autoimmune conditions?
Yeah, so I would say, and again, I'm not a doctor, so this is just my experience. You should talk to your doctor about these things. But when you have an autoimmune condition, immune modulation is really what you want to do. You don't want to boost the immune system per se, because you may actually be increasing that autoimmune response. So I do think that there are herbs that are immunomodulating that can be helpful in autoimmune conditions.
All right. Well, do you have any thoughts on, it looks like thymosin alpha 1 peptide therapy for Lyme?
Yeah, so I explored it personally very briefly. I do think it can be helpful. So thymosin alpha 1 is one of the peptides, generally injectable. I do urge people to do that with a practitioner, getting it from a clean source, compounding pharmacy, and so on, and not just trusting an online source, because I think that that has some potential risks. But thymosin alpha 1 is helping to modulate the balance between Th1 and Th2, and in many cases, people in this realm of Lyme disease and mold illness tend to be more Th2 dominant, where we're dealing more with allergies, autoimmunity, inflammation, mast cell activation, parasites, and so on. And using something like thymosin alpha 1 or thymosin beta 4 can help to modulate the immune system so that the balance between Th1 and Th2 is more appropriate. The Th1 side of that being where the immune system is really dealing with the microbial overgrowths. And so I do think that things like thymosin alpha 1 and thymosin beta 4 do have some potential, both in the immune modulation piece and also in helping the immune system to deal with the microbial burden.
All right. Next question. What did you have done for your cavitations?
So I worked with an oral surgeon in St. Louis that was working closely with Dr. Simon Yu. So it was a surgical procedure in my upper right and lower right wisdom teeth areas. And so they essentially would go back in, debride or clean out that area of whatever. At that point, there's, mushy bone and things like that that are there. That was in 2013. The process, I would say, has changed a bit since then, where oftentimes then now they'll use PRP or PRF or things like that to increase the growth and repair and healing factors in those areas, which I think minimizes the long-term potential for the cavitations to return. So it was not uncommon prior to that to have cavitations potentially return, but it is a surgical procedure. I do know that some people have explored different types of lasers and potentially ozone and things of that nature. I think that it is very similar to the conversation about mold. If you've got mold, growing behind a wall and you have wet, damaged material there, that you really do need to remove it. So I'm not convinced that for any significant cavitation at present, that there are things that work other than a surgical procedure, unfortunately. I mean, I hope over time we get to a place where, ozone and other things could be a replacement for a surgical procedure. But for me, it was a surgical procedure. And I think for most people with a significant cavitation, that really is still the only likely way to resolve it.
All right. Well, you brought up ozone, and there's several questions on ozone. So, have you used ozone therapy IVs or just ozone therapy in general?
I have used ozone in many different ways over many different years. So yes, I did. I've done major autohemotherapy. I did work with a practitioner at one time that did direct IV therapy, which has some risks, and for the most part, is probably not recommended. Rectal insufflation is an option that can be done as well. I've done ear insufflation, nasal insufflation. I've used various products that have, ozonated oils and have ozonides that can be used orally. That's part of Dr. Klinghart's teachings. But I have used quite a few different ways of introducing ozone into the system over the years. I do think that ozone therapy has a lot of potential. It would be fairly high on my list of things that could be helpful. It can help with pathogens, it can help with detoxification, it can help the mitochondria. There's so many things that ozone is potentially helpful for. I have not done what's popular now, which is 10 pass. That came out after I did most of my focus on Lyme and all of that microbial piece. And so I'm I'm not as sure that I have a strong opinion about 10 pass. I think that many different types of ozone therapies can be helpful. Whether or not people need to go to that extreme of doing such a high amount of it in a short period of time, I'm not sure. But I am a fan of ozone therapy in general.
All right. Well, Scott, last question, and I'll let us go for the night. It says, do you find that most everyone has parasites, even if they've done a 3-day stool sample that says no parasites? And she says, how do you ever know?
That's a good question. You probably would have even a better answer for that than I might. I would say in Dr. Klinghart's teachings, in Dr. Simon Yu's teachings, yes, parasites are very, very common. Do I think that most people have some degree of parasite? Yes. Does that mean that the parasites are contributing in a significant way to their illness and to their symptoms? Not necessarily. I mean, if we are 10 times more microbe than human cell, we have lots of viruses and bacteria and fungi and parasites and things in our system that are not all necessarily bad. And in fact, in some immune modulation interventions, they're now using parasites to therapeutically modulate the immune system. So, do I think that they're common? I do. Do I think that everyone that's dealing with a chronic condition has a significant issue with parasites that has to be addressed? Not necessarily. But I do think that it's more common than we anticipate. And even in people who have not been outside the US, for example, I think we definitely have a parasite issue here. And I know that there's been studies where they've looked at, salad bars, for example, in New York City and found parasite eggs in the vast majority of them. So it is an issue, but it doesn't mean that it's something everyone needs to have a significant focus on. That's my thoughts anyway.
Yeah, well, I do find that most people with chronic illnesses are going to have parasites. Is it the number one priority of your body to heal? Not always.
Yeah.
So that's where muscle testing, other testing comes in to play a role. And if you don't know, like you said, layer some things. Add some parasite remedies in there as you're going through Lyme, mold, mycoplasma, Bartonella, Babesia, and all of your other microbes so that you do go through that process. Make sure that you at least attempt it. I find that for me, even yearly now, after healing from Lyme, I'm still doing a protocol every 6 months, at least, to make sure, and parasites are part of that. So yes, I think that I probably do parasites with at least 70% of the people I work with. Doesn't mean that it is their most needed protocol. So it may not be the first protocol, but at least 70% at some point are going to be addressed in some level.
Yeah, and I agree with you that, once you've done it, it doesn't mean you're completely done. I mean, there's certainly some question about just like Lyme and co-infections, are we fully eradicating parasites when we're treating them? Probably not. So for health maintenance, I kind of do something similar. Probably 6 months or so ago, I also went through another round of focus on parasites, and I think that that's it's a good health maintenance thing to do just to maintain our health over time.
Yeah. I was sick. I'm never going back. If there's anything I can do about it, I bet you'd say the same thing. So I
Absolutely.
appreciate so much that you were on here. When you popped on to the call earlier, I said, "Oh, I recognize that voice. I've been listening to you for years." So I was excited just to be able to talk with you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk with you as well. I certainly respect the work that you do. I'm looking forward to continued collaboration. I would mention as we wrap up that I am on the board of directors of the Limelight Foundation, and we focus on providing treatment grants to children and young adults 25 and under that are in financial need to access treatment care for Lyme disease. So we're now over $5 million that we've given out to grant recipients in 49 states. And if someone is listening that could potentially benefit from a treatment grant or is in a position to support that work, you can learn more about that at limelightfoundation.org. And then lastly, I would say, don't ever give up. Don't lose hope. There's so much that's changing in our understanding of these conditions. I think the rate just in the last 2 years for me, it's just accelerated so quickly in terms of the research, the new solutions, the new ideas. I'm really seeing lots of collaboration that I hadn't seen for many years before. So I think it's important to remember that there is hope and people do get better, and to just hold on to that.
I do love what you had to say there and the amazing charity that you're working with. So, like I
Thank
said,
you.
everybody, if you need help, reach out to them. And do you guys take donations?
Absolutely, we do. Yeah.
So if you've already made it through the journey and you have the opportunity to give, give, because you know there are lots of people out there that are in need of help. Thank you so much. Have a great
Thank
rest.
you.
Bye.
Bye bye.